Hi, my name is Liad Mudrik, and I'm happy to tell you a little bit about our lab in Tel Aviv University. Our main focus is to try and tackle some of the biggest problems of consciousness. First and foremost, how does it come about? In other words, how does the brain give rise to conscious experiences, the way we experience the world, which is qualitative and subjective? We also ask, what does consciousness do? So what are the functions of consciousness, and how do conscious processes differ from unconscious processes? And finally, we ask how it is characterized. So what are the factors that affect our conscious perception and make it the way it is? I'll start with the first question, and we have been focused in recent years in testing theories of consciousness. First, in a work led by Itai Yaron from our lab, we gathered together many experiments that interpreted their findings in light of 4 leading theories of consciousness and tried to understand exactly what are the trends that come up from these experiments, and even showed that we can predict well above chance which of the 4 theories is going to be supported just based on the methodological choices of the researchers. And that was for us an interesting observation that signifies that maybe the way we devise our experiments already affects the conclusions that we are about to make at the end of the experimental process. By the way, this website, this database is open. Just look for the contrast database, and you could find there's also a link on our lab page. And you can then you have the opportunity to explore this database yourself and learn more about consciousness and the way it has been studied by neuroscientific labs. But one conclusion from this entire project is that in order to make progress in understanding how the brain indeed gives rise to consciousness, we need to try and test theories of consciousness experimentally in designs that were a priori planned in order to do so. And I have been fortunate enough to take part in such an endeavor called the Cogitate Consortium, where basically this is an adversarial collaboration between 2 leading proponents of 2 theories of consciousness, integrated information theory and global neuronal workspace. And in this project, we came up with 2 experiments that will test these theories. It was a very interesting intellectual experience as well, because working with Stanislas Dehaene and Giulio Tononi in order to find experiments that would actually test their predictions was a great experience. And I should say this is done together with Lucia Meloni and Michael Pitts, who have also been a part of the previous project I presented. And of course, Tanya Brown, our project manager, and many, many people all over the world. We have 11 different labs, great postdocs working on this. And this is an ongoing project involving fMRI, MEG, and ECOG recordings. And I hope to be able to share some news about it as the project progresses. Another type of question that we are interested in is how to study consciousness in more ecological ways. And I should say that the way by which consciousness has been studied in the field has been highly elegant and well controlled, but also somewhat artificial, because we have very sophisticated ways to render stimuli invisible, so make the participant not see some stimulus that I'm presenting on the computer screen. And this is very important and interesting and yielded some very crucial observations, but it is also very far from our experiences in everyday life. Because in everyday life, we do not see, for example, a different image projected to each eye, which is a paradigm we often use in the field. So what we are trying to do in the lab is develop new ways by which we could get closer to real-life conscious versus unconscious processes. For example, Uri Kuriski has developed the real-life CFS methodology. It's a variant of the continuous flash suppression technique developed by Nao Tsuchiya and Christoph Koch. And what you can see here is that the participant is now being projected with very colorful salient stimuli to one of her eyes using the goggles, and that causes her not to see Uri's face, Uri's hand, real-life objects that are presented just in front of her. And that allows us to ask questions about the interplay between perception and action. And on the right, you can see a pilot experiment for a virtual reality protocol that we have developed. This is led by Ronnie Hirschhorn in the lab. Again, many other people have been involved, but what you can see here is that the participant is freely walking down the street. We present some stimulation to her, and she just doesn't see them as we tested by our measures, objectively and subjectively. We also conduct more classical experiments where we try to understand the scope of unconscious processing using behavioral methods. For example, in this experiment conducted by Dan Biderman and Nirden Shir, where we probed integration between features. We also looked at integration between objects and scene. This is in collaboration with Nathan Fevre in an fMRI experiment. I should say fMRI is not one of the techniques that we pursue in the lab, but in collaboration with other researchers, we definitely also engage in that. But also looking into the factors that determine what you will see and what you won't see and when. So in this work, Uri, who I mentioned before, used his real-life CFS technique in order to show that real-life 3D objects emerge into our awareness faster than 2D images of these objects. The scope of unconscious processing is a question that has far-reaching implications. We recently reviewed that in a joint work with Leon Dowell, my former supervisor, looking into the extent and depth of unconscious processing as it is reflected by neuroscientific findings, but it also has some philosophical bearings to it. And in a joint work with a group of philosophers and neuroscientists, we inspected different findings, probing unconscious effects on decision-making, and showed or tried to discuss what they would mean for the debate around free will, which is, of course, a very complicated topic that has been discussed for centuries. We try to highlight a different aspect of it and try to understand how do findings where people show that they are sometimes unaware of the factors that drive their decisions, how do they reflect on that long-lasting discussion? Finally, with respect to free will, we're also a part of another consortium led by Uri Maoz, a long-lasting collaborator of the lab, where philosophers and neuroscientists work together in order to understand key issues with respect to free will. Here, for example, this is an older work of mine and Uri's, together with Gideon Yaffe and Christoph Koch, where we inspected one of the key findings, neuroscientific findings, that was taken as evidence against free will, the readiness potential. It's an EEG component that precedes typically participants' report of having consciously making a decision. And what we show in this work is that this component is fine for arbitrary, meaningless decisions, but does not generalize into more relevant, I think, decisions that are deliberate. And I say relevant because the free will debate has been centered to a very large extent also around questions of moral responsibility. So if I sum up what I've shown you here, you might have noticed that there is a lot of interdisciplinary dialogue in the lab between neuroscientists and philosophers. The type of questions that we are asking are pretty intricate, relating to consciousness, free will, and their relations to neural activity. We try to understand better how people behave and think and what drives these decisions that they are making, and to what extent does conscious versus unconscious processing contribute to these types of effects. One more word of cautious before I end. I always tell students who are interested in the lab, we welcome you. We think this is the most interesting question in the world, but it's very, very hard to study. So search your soul, ask yourselves, are you interested in trying to solve this riddle with us? If so, you're most welcome, but know that this is not going to be an easy ride. In any case, thank you for listening. And of course, I welcome you to send me any question you might have.